The sun rises on day 1171 of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The headlines are dominated by the possibility of an imminent 30-day ceasefire and/or the first direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia since 2022. Large-scale, long-range drone and missile strikes continue to find their mark on both sides of the border. New arms shipments to Ukraine are announced. Innovative new weapons are unveiled by both sides. With all of that going on, it's sometimes easy to forget that on the front lines, the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II rages on mercilessly. In hundreds of locations across the front line, which stretches over 620 miles from the Kherson region in the south to Chernihiv in the north, heavy clashes take place daily, often to the death. And although the Russians continue slowly, inexorably grinding their way mile by mile westwards, the stubborn Ukrainian defense continues to largely hold the Russian meat grinder at bay. Let's take a look at some recent Ukrainian successes down in the trenches on the front lines. On May 12th, operators from Ukrainian Armed Forces Special Operations Forces, or SOF, eliminated a Russian assault group of 8 soldiers during a mission behind enemy lines. The exact location of the successful attack wasn't specified. Here's how it played out. While conducting a special reconnaissance mission beyond the front line, Ukrainian Special Forces detected the movement of an enemy assault unit. The group's commander assessed the situation and ordered a tactical maneuver. The Ukrainian team then quietly and swiftly moved into a more advantageous position and opened fire, catching the Russian unit unawares. After a brief but intense firefight, the sounds of gunfire subsided in the forest. The Russians had stopped firing back. The Ukrainian team moved forward quickly to assess the damage they'd caused and found all 8 Russian soldiers dead. "There's meat everywhere," as one of the Ukrainian troops quips in the video of the battle. After securing the area and searching the bodies, or what remained of them, the SOF unit, which sustained no casualties itself, resumed its reconnaissance mission in the operational zone. A few days earlier, on May 8th, SOF operators also reported the capture of 6 Russian soldiers during another raid behind enemy lines. The exact location was again not specified. According to SOF Command, the SOF operators, clad in their special camouflage gear, stealthily and silently made their way close to the Russian unit's position, then opened fire. The Russians were caught completely off guard by the surprise attack, and after a short firefight, retreated into a dugout, disorientated and confused. The SOF operators then seized the initiative and rushed towards the dugout, which was now secured, with no chance for the Russian soldiers to escape. They told the Russians that the dugout was under their full control, that any further resistance was futile, and that they should drop their weapons and come out of the dugout one by one. The Russians chose life and obliged. They're now no doubt languishing in a Ukrainian prisoner of war center, hoping to be included in the next prisoner exchange between Ukraine and Russia. More on that a bit later. Interestingly, just a few days later, on May 11th, the Ukrainian 33rd Mechanized Brigade shared footage of another incident where Russian soldiers were captured in similar fashion. In this incident, which took place in June 2024, the senior sergeant of an anti-tank missile platoon captured 4 Russian soldiers single-handedly, as described by a soldier from the brigade with the call sign BARS. "A drone spotted the approaching convoy and the guys warned us. We got ready, prepared all the anti-tank weapons we had. We had RPGs and many single-use launchers. We prepared everything. And when they got closer to us, we opened fire. We were firing at both tank and the infantry. The guys using drones, grenade launchers and heavy machine guns stopped their convoy. Some of them turned around and fled, and others were blown up by what was already in place. A lot of the vehicles just turned around and retreated. We started firing from 2, even 3 directions. Despite the carnage inflicted on the Russians, one tank managed to break through to the tree line where the Ukrainian soldiers were positioned and dropped off 6 Russian troopers. As Andriy Lyaskovets, senior sergeant of the ATGM platoon with call sign Snickers, recalls, "One took up a defensive position facing us with a PKM, or Kalashnikov machine gun. He tried to fire a bit, but it didn't work out. An FPV drone strike hit him at that very moment. Another one tried to run somewhere. That didn't work out either." The remaining 4 Russian soldiers hid in a shelter, where they spent the night cowering while Ukrainian forces repeatedly struck the position with mortars and attack drones. The initial order was to eliminate them, but Snickers convinced the commander that they could be taken prisoner. "First of all, I was thinking about our guys sitting in prisons in Russia. We need someone to exchange them with." So how did Snickers get the Russians to surrender? First, the Ukrainians sent in a Mavic drone with a drop payload. When the Russians heard the drone approaching, they quickly hid in a dugout. That enabled Snickers to approach their position without resistance. After a few warning shots, he convinced the demoralized invaders to surrender. For his courage and ingenuity, Snickers was awarded the Order for Courage 3rd Class. However, sadly, he was killed later that same year while performing a combat mission. It's not clear whether the captured Russian soldiers were among the many hundreds of captured soldiers that have been exchanged between Ukraine and Russia to date. On October 4, 2022, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a decree banning negotiations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That decree seems at odds with Zelensky's vow to travel to Istanbul on May 15th to have direct talks with Putin about a possible ceasefire. Nevertheless, the decree left room for the continuation of internationally mediated negotiations with Moscow at technical levels on topics like the Black Sea grain deal, the status of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and the exchange of prisoners of war. And with the assistance of the UAE as mediator, multiple exchanges of POWs have taken place. Most of these have been in the one-for-one format, i.e., for each Ukrainian POW released, one Russian POW is released. In total, there have been 64 such exchanges since the war began, freeing a total of 4,757 Ukrainians, predominantly captured soldiers. 5 exchanges have already taken place in 2025, with the most recent on May 6th seeing 205 prisoners from each side heading home. In this most recent exchange, the released prisoners included representatives from across the different divisions of the armed forces of Ukraine, including the Navy, Air Force, Air Assault Forces, Territorial Defense Forces, National Guard of Ukraine, and the State Border Guard Service. According to Zelensky, they included the defenders of Mariupol and the defenders of the entire front line. They were scattered in many Russian regions, imprisoned in the prison system with the sole purpose of mockery and destruction of humanity. Widespread abuse of POWs has been reported on both sides by the UN and other human rights organizations, particularly on the Russian side. But at least those prisoners that haven't been systematically tortured to death or lined up against a wall and shot dead in cold blood have a chance of returning home. The same cannot be said for foreigners captured while fighting for the other side. On May 3rd, the Ukrainian Defense Forces announced the capture of mercenaries from the African country of Togo. While the exact number of Togolese captured hasn't been specified, the fact of their capture was confirmed by the country's foreign ministry. According to its statement on the matter, these are mostly young people who wanted to study in Russia on scholarship programs. This incident follows the April 23rd announcement of the capture of a mercenary from fellow West African nation Senegal. The man was captured by the 49th Separate Assault Battalion Carpathian Sich during combat operations near Touretsk. He was reportedly detained without resistance by 2 battalion soldiers and had minor injuries to his left leg, which he said were caused by a Ukrainian drone strike. According to him, he had studied in Russia for 2 years and later planned to emigrate to Germany. He said he had found someone who offered to help him travel through Ukraine, claiming, "It's easy to get to Europe from here." The presence of African mercenaries in the Russian ranks isn't a complete surprise. A year ago, reports emerged of a Russian unit tasked with recruiting mercenaries in several African nations, including Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, and Uganda. Recruits are reportedly promised a monthly salary of $2,200, health insurance, and Russian citizenship for themselves and their families. Ukraine reportedly offers its mercenary force, which like the Russians it calls volunteers, more money, between $3,000 and $5,000. However, whatever the contracted payment amount, mercenaries or volunteers fighting for money can expect little protection under local or international law. Under the Geneva Convention, mercenaries are not afforded the same humanitarian rights and expectations of fair treatment as captured nationals of warring nations. So for these fighters and the thousands like them from all over the world fighting on both sides, in some cases it might turn out to be a more merciful option to be killed on the spot rather than captured. One man who did not have a choice because he was killed on the spot was Abdulaziz Shikabidov, whose funeral took place on May 6th in Moscow. Shikabidov, a Russian colonel from Dagestan, who was appointed to head the 76th Guards Air Assault Division, Pskov Division, by Putin on March 10th, was killed in Ukraine in the preceding days. His death, which was publicly mourned in Dagestan, particularly at schools around the region, showcases how Ukraine retains the ability to take out Russian military command. In April, Putin had publicly praised the Pskov Division, emphasizing its daily successes at the front lines. It remains to be seen who will replace Shikabidov and how long they'll last. The Russians will be hoping that whoever it is lasts a bit longer than Shikabidov, or the Russian mechanized group that was repulsed by the 3rd Operational Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine on May 12th. Near the village of Novosahivka in the Donetsk region, around 9.3 miles west of the city of Pokrovsk, the Russians attacked using BMP infantry fighting vehicles. Assault groups were supposed to disembark from the BMPs near the positions of Ukrainian defenders. However, the assault group was spotted by the 3rd Operational Brigade, who opened fire with Stugna P anti-tank systems, which struck the Russian armored vehicles from the flanks. FPV drones were also used, hitting both sides and destroying a Russian soldier who was hiding under a damaged BMP-3. A Vampir bomber drone then mopped up what remained of the Russian infantry and equipment. With their assault on Pokrovsk more or less stalled to the south and east of the city, the Russians are attempting to push forward in the west towards Novosahivka. The idea seems to be to outflank the city and disrupt logistics routes that carry weapons and supplies to the substantial Ukrainian forces defending it. They've deployed significant forces in this direction in an attempt to drive out the Ukrainian defenders, thereby forcing them to send reinforcements from the city of Pokrovsk, weakening its defenses. Further north, the press service of the 13th Kharkiv Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine announced on May 8th that it had successfully liberated a forest area to the north of Liptsi in the Kharkiv region. With superb timing, the liberation of this area, which had been referred to by the Russians as Berlin, was announced on the 80th anniversary of the fall of the Nazi regime. So Berlin has been liberated once again, but this time from Russia. The operation, conducted in conjunction with other units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, including the 92nd Ivan-Sirko Assault Brigade, took over 5 months. Altogether, around 200 hectares of tactically significant territory was liberated at a total cost to the Russians of almost 1,500 soldiers killed or wounded, over 200 units of weaponry, and 175 pieces of equipment. This is the third time the 13th Kharkiv Brigade has been heavily involved in chasing Russians out of the Kharkiv region. In the spring of 2022, Kharkiv participated in the Ukrainian Kharkiv counteroffensive and was instrumental in driving the Russian invaders back across the state border. In March 2023, Kharkiv joined the National Guard of Ukraine, becoming the core of the 13th Operational Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine and joining the Guard of the Offensive. The brigade then gained combat experience in the Svatova sector, the Serebryansky Forest, Ocheretina, and Bakhmut. In June 2024, the 13th Kharkiv Brigade was once again instrumental in the defensive of Kharkiv, participating in the battles for Volchansk, as Ukraine halted Russia's renewed offensive in the region, and now they've liberated Berlin. Meanwhile, heavy battles continue in the Leman-Severki direction, where the Russian offensive to take this area for the third time is coming to the boil, following its capture of most of the cities of Chasiv Yar and Toretsk to the east. On May 3rd, the press service of the 10th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade announced that its units had repelled a Russian assault using civilian vehicles in the Seversky direction, the second time in a fortnight that this kind of attack was repulsed. The Russians attacked using Russian-made commercial cars, modified with anti-drone protection and stripped of their doors and trunks. The intention behind using these vehicles seems to be speed, an attempt to reaching Ukrainian positions as rapidly as possible to disembark infantry troops. However, for the second time in a row, the attack failed miserably. First, aerial reconnaissance spotted the vehicles moving toward Ukrainian positions. Then, the Ukrainian forces attacked with FPV drones, targeting the advancing vehicles with precision strikes. The resulting disarray forced the Russian infantrymen to scatter, where they were picked off by Ukrainian troops. The net result was that the Russians lost 12 cars and 1 motorcycle, which was leading the convoy in a reconnaissance role. They failed to reach the Ukrainian positions and suffered significant personnel losses. This follows a similar Russian assault near the settlement of Bohatyr, announced on April 27th with a similar result. On that occasion, the Khortytsia Operational Strategic Group, together with supporting units, was responsible for obliterating the Russian assault. The Russians deployed 18 motorcycles and 10 vehicles, also equipped with anti-drone protection, which attempted to cross the fields and approach the Ukrainian positions. Again, a reconnaissance drone detected their advance, allowing Ukrainian artillery to open fire on them with cluster munitions while they were still on the move. Another part of the assault forces managed to take cover in the nearest forest strip where, thanks to close coordination with brigades in command, significant losses were inflicted on the enemy. Out of the 18 motorcycles involved in the assault, 15 were destroyed, along with 9 of the 10 civilian vehicles equipped with anti-drone protection. Around 40 Russian soldiers were reported to have been killed in the process. After weeks of steadfastly holding back a relentless assault by the Russians on the strategically important settlement of Bohatyr, it seems as if the battle might be finally coming to an end in favor of Russia, albeit at an extremely high cost. But in the Zaporizhia region, where Russians also seem to be putting together another major offensive, Ukrainian defenses appear to be holding their ground quite comfortably. As a result, Russian losses of manpower and equipment are piling up. On May 12th, the Operational Command South reported that yet another Russian Buk surface-to-air missile system had been taken out with a drone strike near the settlement of Verkhny Tomak. At the time of the strike, this Buk M1 variant was likely not in a combat position, which made it possible to successfully detect and destroy it. Russia actively uses the Buk M1 in frontline areas for air defense. When it was hit, the Buk M1 was only equipped with 1 missile, which likely indicates that it had recently been used for the last time. After the precise hit, the ammunition detonated and a fire broke out, completely destroying the launcher. In recent months, the number of Russian Buk air defense systems destroyed by Ukraine has increased significantly. That includes both the standard M1 and M2 variants, as well as the newest M3 version, which is capable of carrying 6 to 12 9M317ME missile. According to data from Oryx, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have destroyed or damaged over 40 Buk systems since the war began, along with 23 9A316 transporter loader vehicles and 30 9A317M self-propelled firing vehicles. A month ago, operators of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, in conjunction with paratroopers, identified and struck 3 Buk air defense systems of different modifications in the Kursk region within a 12-hour period. The units involved were the 413th Separate Unmanned Systems Battalion, RAID, in cooperation with the 78th Air Assault Regiment's 3rd Jamil Consolidated UAS Detachment. First, these expert FPV drone crews successfully disabled a Buk M2 launcher disguised in a forest belt, hitting the driver's compartment. Then they struck a Buk M1 container loaded with an anti-aircraft missile with a second drone, causing an explosion and complete destruction of the vehicle. Finally, to make a clean sweep of all 3 Buk variations, the operators of the 413th Battalion hit 2 Buk M3 launchers, damaging their radars. Although the vehicles were not destroyed, the damaged radars will keep them out of action for an extended period until they're repaired. Altogether, since the beginning of the year, in addition to the aforementioned Buk systems, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have also destroyed or damaged 3 Strela 10 systems, as well as 1 OSA AKM and 1 Tor M2 system. So for all the chatter about ceasefire and peace negotiations, the battle rages on ferociously, on the ground and in the air. And if current events on the battlefield are anything to go by, the Ukrainian Defense Forces remain powerful and resourceful, and will continue defending their homeland with bravery and ingenuity for as long as it takes. But what do you think? Which of the operations we've discussed in this video impresses you the most? With the imminent arrival of large new batches of NATO weapons, will Ukraine go on the offensive and start pushing Russia back? If yes, which areas should they focus on first? Please let us know what you think in the comments section below, and thank you, as always, for watching. Now go and check out the Ukrainian shadow army Putin fears the most, or click this other video instead.